to Freshly Forever, a podcast that gives you fascinating insights week after week. Here's your host, Vi Kumar.
Hey folks, welcome to another episode on podcast Freshly Forever. Today I have the pleasure of talking to Debbie Reber, and she is a parenting activist, best-selling author, keynote speaker, and the founder and CEO of Tilt Parenting, a top podcast, community, and educational resource for parents raising differently wired children. Her most recent book is Differently Wired, A Parent's Guide to Raising an Atypical Child with Confidence and Hope. Hey, Debbie, welcome to the podcast.
Hello, thanks so much for having me.
Well, I just thought there's no better person than you to talk about the topic of embracing kids for who they are and raising children in this, complex society where there's so much of a boxed approach. So why do you think all that happens in the first place? Just getting tied to a boxed approach. Kids have to be academically at a certain level or behaviorally at a certain level, right? Mm-hmm. So what do you think can help change this norm, Debbie?
Well, I think we are in this situation because that's kind of the way things have been for so long, right? The education system hasn't really been revamped in over a century, really. And the world in which we live in is becoming more complicated. We know that colleges are harder to get into. There's more applicants. Everything feels more intense. And so we're all just kind of moving along and progressing without stopping and questioning, wait a minute, is this the best thing for my child? Does this make sense? Does this system even work? And I think a lot of that is really fear-based. I think people are afraid to not fit inside the box. And so everyone's just trying to conform and to move through this educational journey, this parenting journey in the way that everyone else is. And I'm using air quotes when I say that. And so I think that the way that we go against this norm is by being vocal about it, by standing up, by questioning everything that we thought we knew about what school should look like or what our child's timeline might look like, or what does success actually look like? What does it mean to be a fulfilled adult? And we really need to push back on those definitions that we've just accepted and start to question and get curious, and then start asking for the changes that we feel would help to move us forward in terms of what that paradigm actually looks like.
So is this more of like an awareness issue, you think, raising more awareness, like asking questions and making people realize that, hey, it's okay to ask those questions. It's okay to stand up against the system, the way that it is. And is that the way to go then?
Yeah, I think pushing back against systems is hard, and it takes some bravery, and it takes people who are willing to kind of make a ruckus, and that can be really uncomfortable. But I think it takes a parent who's willing to say, wait a minute, this doesn't work, and here's why. The more parents, I think the more you talk to other people, maybe this has been your experience, it has been for mine. There's so many people who are dissatisfied with the current paradigm, but people are afraid to make waves.
Speak.
Yeah. So I think when we are willing to speak more openly about what we see, we find more people who share our ideas, our vision, experiences, and then, there's power in numbers. So I think just that building awareness, I feel like it is a sea change that will happen over time, but it does require raising awareness, raising visibility for, my space, as you know, is with neurodivergent children. I think they're a huge part of this shift and pushing back. And it takes a lot of bravery for everybody. It takes bravery for teachers to push back against, the system. It takes bravery for parents, for families, and for communities.
So anger, frustration, and all of this in kids, do you think that's all stemming from this boxed approach? And is this increasingly a result of societal demands that we place on our children? And how can we do better there?
I mean, I think that right now, we are in year 3 of this COVID pandemic now, and endemic. And I think that has to be mentioned as something that's really contributed to suffering for kids today and adolescents in terms of their mental health, and their social emotional development is lagging. They're struggling a lot. And in terms of societal demands, we've seen as we've gone back to school that there's this pressure to catch up, and we have to make up for this lost time, and not really a lot of room for kids to just be like, wait a minute, I'm not doing well here. I need to catch my breath. I'm feeling behind. I feel like I lost 2 years of my life. And so I think that creates a lot of tension, a lot of frustration for kids. I know so many kids are feeling that, that they don't want to grow up. They feel like they have lost these really critical years in their development. So they feel behind, and that makes them feel anxious. And it's just this really unhealthy cycle, I think, that we're in right now. And I do think those societal demands, and not saying, wait a minute, maybe we should take a step back. Maybe we should give our kids more time instead of trying to get back on the bandwagon and get all caught up and keep moving forward as if none of this has happened. I think that's a real issue.
But even outside of the pandemic, I guess my point is, are we placing so much demands on our children? And is that what is manifesting as anger and frustration that we see in our kids? And which we tend to associate as like a behavioral change, maybe. Is that something that's causing that too?
Yeah, I think it's a combination of things. I think societal demands, I think the lives that our kids lead right now, which are very much online, and so they have access to so much more information. I think we're living in really challenging times right now, especially here in the US, and our kids see it all and they feel it all, and they can understand that there's something going on that may not feel fair, and that is creating a lot of little activists, I think. I definitely think there's this idea that school, this age from K through 12th grade, this is what's expected of you, and you need to do these things in order to move on to what's next. And so we're kind of moving forward with all of that in mind, but not really looking at who these kids are and what they need and where they are emotionally and socially and developmentally and intellectually. So I think all of that, and not looking at the individual experience of these kids, is where the biggest problem is.
Do you think we are extending this mentality again, this boxed approach and this achievement culture? Say, hey, kids have to be, like certain way, like you said, with the K through 12 curriculum. Okay, this is what we do, and this is the norm, if you do go out of bounds, then you're considered something, we start categorizing, quote unquote, right? So does that happen again when it comes to classifying kids as typical or atypical, whatever that may be?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think, especially again, if we look at schools, there really isn't a lot of wiggle room in terms of how kids are able to demonstrate their mastery or knowledge on a subject. It's tests, it's paper, like it's a very kind of rote way of learning in most schools in a traditional setting, that, and these standardized tests. And there are so many different ways that kids learn. There's so many kids who have a lot of gifts that are completely ignored, and strengths that are completely ignored because the school system that they're in doesn't allow them to express their gifts. And so often those kids, they may be the neurodivergent kids, the kids who have learning disabilities, who are differently wired, who have ADHD, who are autistic. And because the way that they show up in a classroom, and because their strengths are not being supported, they can become challenging in certain classroom situations. And that may come out as behavioral challenges, or it may come out as non-compliance, or it may look like someone who isn't motivated or who isn't willing to work hard, when really that's the furthest thing from the truth.
I guess the whole purpose of this conversation is, tapping into your expertise as a person, that has these sort of, this formula, so to speak, to kind of, address the societal norms, so to speak, in terms of, dealing with these differently wired children. And in fact, they are specially able and twice as gifted, perhaps, right? So, and your own story there, raising your son, Asher, who is now at a college level right now? Is he into college?
Yeah, Asher is 17 and definitely doing college level work. Yeah. But still in high school. Yeah.
Okay. See, he's still in high school, but just approaching his phase into college. So your story there with raising a child and all the issues that you had to wrestle with, Debbie, just why don't you take us through what you faced and what normally other parents that have these differently wired children face in this world, and how best can we just, take this forward, like how was your journey there? I know you have said so much in your TED talk as well, and you have it, you have written it in a book as well. But why don't we just start with where your journey led to everything that happened later?
Sure. Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, we have one child who, from a very early age, knew was a little more intense, perhaps, than same age peers, was very verbal, very young. Asher taught himself to read before the age of 2. And, so there were some really interesting things going on. And also some really intense emotional experiences, very strong-willed. If you look at my bookshelf back then, it was like raising your spirited child, raising your strong-willed child, the explosive child. So we were dealing with really intense emotional dysregulation, and that was challenging. And so going into preschool and then elementary school, it was very challenging because Asher was perplexing, Clearly, there were so many strengths and such a love of learning and this, very, a love of reading and just devouring information and creative and silly and all of these things, and really not kind of reading social cues or caring very much at all about complying with norms and expectations in classroom settings because they didn't resonate, and they didn't really support how Asher was wired. And I'll just give you an example. I used to get a lot of feedback from teachers about Asher not paying attention in school or needing to get up and walk around and move all the time, which I know can be challenging in a classroom. But there was this very, clear idea of what paying attention looked like. And that's what these teachers expected. And Asher explained to me, when I focus on paying attention, I'm working so hard to look like I'm paying attention that I can't listen to anything else. So that was just an example of how the expectation of sitting still and looking required so much energy that there was no learning happening. And that happens for so many kids. That's just one little example of how a child is and shows up to their life is not accepted or understood, really. And so for Asher, a lot of the challenges looked like behavioral challenges. And so it was like, well, we got to fix this behavior. We have to address this behavior, as opposed to let's understand how to support this child and really develop their strengths. And so we went through several schools in a short period of time and ended up homeschooling. I homeschooled Asher from grades 3 through 8. And that's when I really kind of got to understand the kind of a learner Asher is and how they tick, and really understand the strengths and the challenges that come with ADHD, that come with profound giftedness, that come with all of these things, sensory issues. So I just started shifting my view. Asher said to me one time, we were working on a paper when we were homeschooling, and Asher was like walking around the room pacing while dictating this paper. And just very physical. It was a very active writing process. And Asher and I said, wow, I can really understand why this is challenging in a classroom and Asher said, well, it's only a problem for other people. I don't have for me, this is just how I write. It's only a problem because you think it should look a different way. And that to me was a real light bulb moment. And that's when I started just thinking this is the experience for so many neurodivergent kids. And as I started to better understand Asher, I realized I wanted to support other parents in really understanding their neurodivergent kids too. Because if we don't really lean into and support who these kids are, we are going to lose out on all the gifts that they have to contribute.
And I know I read your book, and there you say there was this conversation one night at the dinner table when Asher kept apologizing for being late to the table, and then you said, "Hey, you don't have to apologize." And then he said to you, that was kind of like an aha moment for you, right? When hey, I'm so used to apologizing. And, so it was like the school has this check the box mentality. And so every time, something would be off the norm according to what the school dictates, then it just became like an apology situation for him, correct?
Correct. Yes. There was a lot of apologizing just for being who Asher was. So interrupting, Asher struggled with impulse control. When Asher gets excited about an idea, Asher wants to share it. And at that point, at second grade, didn't have the skills yet to realize, oh, I'm going to wait until I have an opportunity to share. And so I think that is the biggest disconnect, is this idea of a behavioral challenge versus a child who does not have the skills yet to make a different choice. And the way that they are showing up and experiencing school and friendship and life is completely based on the way that they're wired. There's nothing wrong with being wired differently, right? It's just a difference. And so that's where there's so much work to do to have behavior better understood and stop looking at it like it's a problem and start understanding the underlying lagging skill and how can we focus on that.
In fact, a lot of times it's not even like a lagging skill. It's just that, all of us humans are like different, right? And so then each one of us cannot be placed in silos, so to speak, just because, we are different. It's just that they are exceptionally able, a lot of them, though they have certain other areas for improvement, if you will. Whereas sort of these typical kids or typical human beings that the others are also have these differences, right? We are all lacking in certain other functionalities or areas and there is areas for improvement in us too. So I guess it's about time. And in a world, like you said, like in a pandemic driven world where we all are glued to screens and sitting all the time, standing only helps, I guess. So I don't really understand why, even from a health standpoint, for better well-being, I'm not really sure why people cannot understand the importance of someone standing and thinking through their process and writing a paper as opposed to just sitting at a desk and doing like what 8 other people in the classroom are doing. Right? So it's just amazing. And so does this all cause a need for even us as a society to think about having like a psychology education, even for the educators right at the beginning? Or do you think, introduction of even some sort of psychology lessons, even in a very playful way for even children to begin with, can help embrace this whole thing, this whole differentiating aspect thing to go away?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, what you said before is totally true. Everyone is wired uniquely. Everyone has their strengths. Everyone has their areas of challenge. Everyone has their experiences. And they're all worthy of respect and honoring that experience. And I think definitely, as parents, right, if you're raising a neurotypical kid, you may just be able to like read your standard parenting book, be like, okay, I'll follow this, or use the parenting approach you were raised with, or whatever. And that may work until it stops working, until maybe adolescence and a kid rebels or whatever happens. But what I think is that we all benefit when parents or teachers or people kind of get to better understand the uniqueness of every human, better understand kind of the emotional response system, the nervous system responses, the sensory responses that apply to all people. And Yeah, so better understand that. So when we see any person, any kid having a hard time, we realize, oh, this is a person having a hard time. My friend Mona Delahook, she wrote a wonderful book called Brain Body Parenting. And she talks about like, oh, this person's nervous system is triggered right now. How can we support their nervous system so that they have better coping strategies to deal with this challenge? That's for every child, not just a child with a learning disability or learning difference. So I think we all benefit when we can better understand how we experience the world, how we can support ourselves around areas of challenge, and how can we, kind of grow as people. And so certainly parents and teachers and educators learning more about what's really going on in the brain and in the body would be so helpful.
Yeah, I mean, and you said it beautifully there, like when your friend wrote that book and, what she has expressed there. I think if only everyone can embrace the fact that every day is a learning journey and there's opportunities to learn, I think we can all see and reflect on things more positively than what we do today, right? And in this whole journey raising Asher, who's such a wonderful kid, based on whatever I've read about, whatever you're saying right now, such a joy to even get to know. What made you get into this journey where you would propagate this information on a bigger level, start this company, Till Parenting, and then do this wonderful podcast, which has like several million downloads, and just get on this journey, Debbie?
I've always kind of been someone who's created what I've needed. So I am like my kid, I'm always working on a bunch of projects. Even when I was working full time in the corporate world, I was writing a book on the side and doing this on the side and volunteering. Like I need to be busy. And a lot of my work has always been trying to create resources that I wish I had access to. And so when I was parenting Asher, and really struggling, when Asher was younger, and it was so hard to find optimistic, helpful resources to really forge a path to figure out what our options were and to feel supported through the whole process. I was just struggling so much. And I kind of always knew, once I kind of am in a better place and I'm feeling more optimistic and hopeful about my own parenting journey and our family, I want to support other families. I'm going to have to share what I've learned so that other parents don't have to feel this way, because it's not okay. There's so many of us who are raising these unique kids. It's well over 20% of the population, are neurodivergent. So that's a lot of families. That's a lot of neurodivergent, differently wired kids. And it's just not okay that people feel isolated and like they're the only ones going through this, or there's something wrong with their kids. So I just felt really inspired to support other families so that they don't have to feel alone, and then give them access to really useful resources that they may not be able to tap into or afford or connect with, so that they really feel that they have choice and the information that they need for their families.
Yeah, such an empowering journey for people that need the resources and can, access them. Say like we have a podcast, which is a free resource, and several other things, listening into people like you, doing the speaking engagements. And when it becomes available online, just to be able to access it is something, really wonderful that you're doing.
Back in a moment with our guest on Freshly Forever.
And as far as your book, Differently Wired, you talk about these 18 tilts or paradigm shifting ideas there. Why don't you reflect on some of those here?
Yeah, so I wrote that book. Part of it, the first part is really a manifesto. So I'm really trying to kind of, for lack of a better phrase, rally the troops, like get people really motivated and inspired to make this paradigm shift. The rest of the book are these 18 tilts, and they're aimed at parents, and each tilt is really kind of a reframe, because I think lots of practical strategies in there too, but so much of this work of supporting ourselves and our kids and our families is our work that we have to do on ourselves. Like, we cannot show up for our kids if we're not taking care of ourselves. And discovering what we need to support our families and ourselves. So each tilt is a little reframe. So the first one we kind of talked about a bit, but it's question everything you thought you knew about parenting. And that's where I really encourage parents to get it all out on the table and really explore, like, what did I think this was going to look like? And how do I feel about the fact that it looks completely different? And what am I still fighting in that disconnect? And how is that impacting my family? So that's kind of a tilt that we start with. One of my favorite tilts that I'm talking a lot about right now is to just respect your child's unique timeline, because that is another huge area of conflict for so many families, because whether it's their child doesn't know how to ride a bike yet, or tie their own shoes, or go to this corner store independently, or isn't reading at this level yet, or there's so many ways that we may fear our child is not where we think they should be. And we can take that fact and we can spin it out to mean their future is, ruined, their potential is down the drain, right? We can really kind of hyper focus on these kind of arbitrary milestones. And so that tilt is really about, all right, where are the areas where I feel my child isn't where they should be? And questioning that. Does it really matter that my kid knows how to ride a bike by 6? What if they learn at 12? Will the world end? No, it's going to be okay. So it's really kind of just figuring out where is that tension and doing the work on ourselves to create more peace around it, so that we don't bring our own anxiety into our relationship with our child.
And does this mean even at the grassroots level, something needs to change with even our education system? Because again, we attach timeline to everything. And even when you go to a pediatrician's visit, you're given this questionnaire to fill that says, hey, is this development even in line with whatever the child is supposed to be doing? Right?
Yeah, we're measuring where kids are always from the moment they're born. You're exactly right. My child's in the 70th percentile of this or whatever. I mean, I think that is one of the biggest challenges for schools is we know even within a grade, there's often like a variance of 2 years sometimes of ages. And we're expecting kids to all be doing the exact same thing when we know that developmental timelines for any child are all over the map. They're asynchronous. Some kids are really socially advanced. They may be lagging in, some cognitive development. Then there are kids who are, reading way ahead, but emotionally and socially, they're well below their same age peers. And so we need to figure out how to see the whole child in school systems so that we're not just kind of focusing on these certain markers that we have deemed are important, but don't really look at the whole child.
Does this mean then we kind of shift into this interest-based training block, so to speak? That way we just focus on the child's interest at that time, as opposed to saying, hey, okay, this is the core curriculum. This is what you learn. This is what you do. And then if someone doesn't end up doing that, we classify them as, okay, an attention deficit child or whatever, and go the medication route, right? Rather than going any route like, say, meditation, which can benefit not just the child, the one child, but the entire classroom perhaps, instead of a doctor giving them medication, right? And what about the block system of learning, where each one, kind of goes and does their thing of executes that activity rather, in the form of an art-based theme or whatever they are good at. Or if you just want pen and paper to go write it, do that activity, just go do it that way, right? What do you think of that?
There is a big push, I don't know if it's big, but there is a push for something called universal design learning. And that is I'm not an expert on it, but my understanding is that it is very project-based learning. It's learning where students have the freedom to demonstrate their knowledge in different ways, whether it is through artistic expression or writing or mathematics or whatever that looks like, to really respect that every child has these unique strengths and that when they can be engaged in their learning and approach it through a strengths-based lens, it can completely change the experience for them. So it's something that I think there is kind of a movement to get that brought into school systems. It's an uphill battle because, there's so much priority on testing and performance on standardized tests for funding for the schools. And so a lot of teachers don't feel that they have even the flexibility or freedom to teach the way they would ideally teach. And so there are some kind of policy changes that need to happen in order to make room for some of these alternative learning styles.
So until that happens, then is homeschool the way to go for these kids then?
Well, I mean, I just want to say that homeschooling isn't an option for so many families and for many different reasons. So I never like to say like that is the solution. Homeschooling can be a great solution, even on a temporary basis for a lot of parents of especially neurodivergent kids. And many neurodivergent kids will have at least a year or even a semester where they were homeschooled for whatever reason. But I think also parents can do so much, even if their kids are in a traditional school setting. Make sure that at home you're providing opportunities for enrichment. Make sure that you provide opportunities or just show interest in the things that your kid is interested in, even if that's video games. Like, there are so many avenues into deeper learning and exploration through the things that our kids are already gravitating towards. And so if their needs aren't being met in a traditional school system, there are so many different ways, so many accessible, free ways to really support them on these other things at home and their personal time on weekends and over the summers.
Mm-hmm. So how important then is it for even families themselves to not box them into categories? And when so much of impediments exist outside, how best can parents and the rest of the family involved, how best can they help neurodivergent kids channel their energy fruitfully and succeed, Debbie?
I mean, I talk a lot about, in fact, one of my tilts is about becoming fluent in your child. And that really means as parents to get really curious about who our kids are and the way that they experience the world and what their strengths are and what sparks them and what is frustrating and where are areas where they don't have as many skills and could use some support. And that's always changing. So I think, the best thing we can do is really not treat our child as, not look at our child through this lens of this is a child this age, they should be doing X, Y, and Z. And instead say, this is my child. Wow. It's really interesting the things that they gravitate towards. It's really interesting what gets them really frustrated. It's really interesting what a sensitive person this is. Like, just really start to understand and get so curious about who your child is and create deep connection with them so that as they grow and change, you're kind of in tune with them. I think that is the foundation for everything, because we want our kids to feel seen. We want them to feel really secure in their relationship with us and that we've got their back and that we're going to support them, that we're going to find ways to help them really develop their gifts. And so, yeah, that's what I would say. I mean, there's so many things we could talk about with neurodivergence and things. And I think it just depends on the way their child is wired. But the one thing I will say that applies to everything is if your child is differently wired, does have a learning disability or multiple learning differences, remember that your child is not broken. Like, the goal isn't to fix our kids and to get them back on this path that we think is the right path for them. The goal is to understand who they are and what they need to be successful, to be able to really lean into their gifts and to grow confident and have agency and eventually become adults who really know how to get what they need in life so they can create the life that they want for themselves.
And you said it very nicely there, to not feel that they are broken, but instead, kind of help them understand what they are good at and then support them and things like that, right? So knowing that your child is unique, how can parents feel confident about raising such children? I mean, and you as a parent having done that, what would you say when it comes to, how parents, start to feel confident about doing this whole thing?
I mean, I think the biggest thing is to really, first of all, just get real with yourself about the fears that you have, about what a child's differences mean. Because we all have these stories, right? We might have some biases against certain labels. We may really not like, we don't want the word autism to be associated with our child, or ADHD or whatever it is, because in our minds, we may make that mean that there's something wrong, or we might buy into the stigma attached with certain things. So we need to first address that and do our own work so that we're not kind of bringing that fear and anxiety into the parenting relationship. And then it's like I said before, it's just really getting curious about who your child is, leaning into and embracing who they are, remembering every day that there's nothing wrong with them. They're not broken. They're really interesting. These kids are fascinating. I'll just say I love neurodivergent kids so much because they look at the world in a different way, and they experience things in a nonconformist way. And that's so creative. And there's so many cool things that come along with that. So the way to be confident is to notice when we start feeling triggered about fear or worry or anxiety, questioning those things, right? Challenging our anxiety, challenging our fears, when we're spiraling about what does this mean about my child? Like, challenge that stuff, come up with evidence for how those thoughts might not be true, and kind of push back on that, and just recommit every day to just showing up for who your kid is, showing up for yourself, and just being curious about who they're going to become. We don't know. We can't predict the future. I certainly can't. Mm-hmm. So I think that curiosity mindset, like, wow, this is a pretty interesting kid. I know I'm going to do everything I can to support this child to become the person they're meant to be. I wonder what that's going to look like.
Yeah, that's interesting, right? You even in your TED Talk, you focus on so many people, that were wired differently. And it was interesting to hear that. You even mentioned Bill Gates, you mentioned Steve Jobs, and, everyone that did things differently, and they are now at the top of the world in their field and whatever they did. Yeah, creating also this secure net or safety net for the children and making them feel that you got their back. But how then do you create a secure world for such children in terms of they also need a social circle, right? So how do you break the stigma, break the barriers on that front, and create this sort of the social circle for them? And would that again help you as a parent feel more confident that, hey, okay, after all, my child is being more accepted now? And, does that make things easier for you as a parent as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think especially when kids are younger, that's when it's, I think, the most challenging, because their behavior or the way that they show up, especially when kids are quote unquote meant to be compliant, right? There's an expectation of what compliance looks like, and we really value that in our society. And so I think it's when our kids are younger that it's really important to make sure that, first of all, they feel really secure at home, that we're not putting extra pressure on them, that they feel really seen and accepted at home. And it's important that we find places where they can be with similar peers, community groups that are made up of neurodivergent kids, or, gifted kids often will find cohorts to hang out because they just experience the world differently, and they need that camaraderie with other gifted kids to feel like they're not the weirdo in the group, right? That they are not an outlier, but actually they're just part of this community. So I think finding opportunities.
Popularly called the nerdy kids, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And actually being a nerd is really in right now, is what I've heard. So that's a good thing. But yeah, so I think that stuff is really important, especially when our kids are still at home, and just finding opportunities for them to find their people and to be with their people so that they can show up and be accepted the way that they are. And that always starts at home. And yeah, I think, part of the reason I started Tilt Parenting is I wanted to create community for other parents, because when our child isn't thriving or isn't fitting in, or we're getting feedback that there's something quote unquote wrong with who our child is, we often isolate as parents. So being in community with other parents who are raising outside the box kids who are kind of on this path as well can be so comforting, can help us realize that we're not alone. Actually, we're part of a really amazing community, amazing group of families. And that definitely helps build confidence and strength so we can show up with the energy that we need to not only parent our kids, but tackle these systems that aren't supporting them.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's interesting, I think, just advocating for this need as well in terms of speaking up, asking questions and raising awareness, I guess is also right there is probably half the battle won. I think, coming to grips with the situation is, I know it's very difficult, but then to be able to advocate just like you are doing is something phenomenal. I recently read a post on LinkedIn that said, hey, I'm taking a break from my work right now, and so is my wife, because we are raising a neurodivergent kid and everybody looks at him differently, and which is sad, right? But then the man went on to say, hey, I'm writing this on LinkedIn because I want my professional network to know that I'm not there right now, but then we'll be back. It's a time when we can afford to take a break to be with our child and attend to what the child needs much more than what I can make money out of with work, because we have, I think, we have enough to support ourselves at the moment. And which to me was like, outstanding. That was just something really, it made a lot of difference putting it out there on LinkedIn, because I think that can help other parents to just stand up and say, hey, you know what? After all, kind of there's no need to follow this boxed approach, and we are going to be more accepting of every child, be it typical or so-called atypical, whatever they may be, right? And it's just, sometimes people don't realize that they are twice exceptional, they are gifted. And I'm sure, and you write in your book, right, that's 1 in every 5 kids are like potentially neurodivergent, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I guess it makes a lot of sense. Yeah. I guess it makes a lot of sense to, be more accepting and have more programs that can just be more inclusive for everybody. And right there, I think, comes your masterclass series, the meditation programs and the emergency reset that you offer on your website, right? What do they focus on, Debbie? And how do you think they are helping parents that are taking advantage of that today? And how can it help others that are potentially, willing to try it out?
Yeah. Well, I'll say the emergency reset is a little mini course that I created just to help parents who are really just stuck in a cycle that is not working, and they need to kind of, I say, just like push the big reset button, clean slate for you and your child, reset, start over, take those breaths and kind of shift that energy. So that's like a kind of an emergency kit, because a lot of parents like me need that support sometimes.
Oh yeah, and SOS.
Yeah, SOS, exactly. Yes.
Yeah, when say a nanny leaves or something happens, right? So
that's exactly right. That's exactly right. The meditation program was a one-time offering, but I may do it again with Dr. Nicole Tétrault, who wrote a wonderful book called Insight into a Bright Mind, and offered to bring meditation to my community. And so we did a 4-week course, and yeah, I'm hoping we'll do it again, but it was really nice to meet with a group of parents and kind of learn how to more tune into our breath and our emotional experience. And then Nicole ran some guided meditations. The other program that's kind of the thing I do the most is how I work with families. It's called the Differently Wired Club. And that is really the community that I needed when I was going through this. And it's a way for parents to meet. Like, actually, as soon as I get off this call, I'm doing a virtual office hours with parents from around the world. And we just meet and talk about what's hard. We problem solve and brainstorm through challenges, and just really get to be in a space where people really understand what we're going through.
Like-minded folks, right? So
exactly.
And how do you think any of these programs are helping children cope with what they are dealing with? Do any of your programs, do they necessarily target only parents, or is it intended for the child in the middle of it all?
I mean, everything that I do is to support the parent in better supporting their child. So I don't work directly with children. What I do is help parents either strategize around areas of challenge, executive function, emotional regulation, whatever those challenges are. So definitely supporting and coming up with ideas and tools that they can use with their child, and primarily helping ourselves so that we can show up to do that work, because it can be exhausting. We can feel like failures. We can just feel like completely stuck and overwhelmed by what can be very challenging situations. So it's about mostly helping the parent feel better equipped to address whatever challenges they're going through with their kids.
Okay, phenomenal. And if you would just some 2 cents worth for people dealing with these challenges, yet how best they can see the gifts these exceptionally able children bring to the world, right? And even for society in embracing these children, what would you say to that, Debbie?
I would just say that, first of all, your child is exactly the child that he, she, or they are meant to be, and there's nothing wrong with them. And the sooner that you can kind of stop fighting who they are and get curious about who they are, and really start looking at strengths and really focus on that deep connection and not trying to fix them, but support them, that is going to shift everything for your family. So the biggest pain points I see are when we're not accepting what's actually really going on. So if we can kind of do that work to more lean into what's happening, that's when our kids start to relax. They start becoming more available to do the kind of emotional and developmental growth that we want to see for them. And we start feeling so much better in that experience.
And if you were to translate that to whatever journey you have dealt with in raising Asher, how would you put that in a nutshell?
I mean, with Asher, for me, everything changed when I really decided to not have my own agenda when I was homeschooling, like to not show up to our school day with a list of things that I wanted to do and check them off so that I could get on with my day. Instead, I was like, okay, I'm going all in for who this kid is. And I'm just like, I don't know what's going to happen today. I'm going to go with the flow and get curious. And when I started to show up with that energy, that's when everything changed. And it just, once you kind of start making those shifts, once you start realizing the benefits of really leaning into who your child is and they respond, it just creates the most beautiful momentum and can lead to such a deeper relationship with our kids.
Very well said. And in fact, I recently read in an article that theater and improvisation, how much, that's helping autistic children. So I guess, like letting them be comfortable in a space where they can thrive, I think is really important, absolutely. Right? So that's when we can help embrace them better, and we can just help foster their talents and abilities to just be better showcased in a world where we all could use any amount of improvisation and comforting. Exactly. Most importantly, comforting gestures, not just be rough and rude to everybody. So would you like to add anything here in terms of your contact information or any other programs that are potentially coming up? And would you like to share anything else here, Debbie?
No, I just really appreciate this conversation and going deep and looking at all the nuances and school systems and all of that. It's a lot, but it's such an important conversation to have. And I would love anyone to check out Tilt Parenting. It's just tiltparenting.com. I have almost 300 podcast episodes on there. You can search by theme, and you can download a free chapter of my book, Differently Wired, if you want to read more about my story. And then my Differently Wired Club has been open only 3 times a year, but I'm going to start in October. It'll be open monthly. And so if people want to be with other parents and learn together in a supportive community, that would be the place I would check out. It's you can just find it on Tilt Parenting. It's the club.
Okay, awesome. And thank you so much for this conversation. That website is tiltparenting.com, TILT parenting.com. And thank you so much for your time today, Debbie, and thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. I hope every listener here can tap into the resources that you offer and certainly take advantage of everything that you do for the community.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Listeners, as always, rate the podcast, follow the podcast, and follow me on Instagram at YP Kumar for all things digital media and lifestyle. Until next time, with yet another interesting guest and yet another interesting topic, it's me, Vice, saying so long.